Hello, my name is Tony. Today I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm here to read this book and then talk about it. The Daily Reflections book for February 20th, 2026. It's called The Gift of Laughter. At this juncture, his AA sponsor usually laughs. That's from the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions book found on page 26. Before my recovery from alcoholism began, laughter was one of the most painful sounds I knew. I never laughed, and I felt that anyone else's laughter was directed at me. My self-pity and anger denied me the simplest of pleasures or lightness of heart. By the end of my drinking, not even alcohol could provoke a drunken giggle in me. When my AA sponsor began to laugh and point out my self-pity and ego-feeding deceptions, I was annoyed and hurt, but it taught me to lighten up and focus on my recovery. I soon learned to laugh at myself, and eventually I taught those I sponsor to laugh also. Every day I ask God to help me stop taking myself too seriously. Period. The end of the reading. So I had to look this up. What does that mean by what I term internet mic standards? The Google AI, I don't know what they call themselves. I'm sure they got some catchphrase for it. That program, the Google AI program, to return a search result. What does it mean to take yourself too seriously? I looked that up, and it says taking yourself too seriously generally means having an inflated sense of self-importance or a rigid attachment to your image, which makes you less resilient to the messiness of life. It often manifests as an inability to find humor in your own flaws or mistakes. I like all that. That sounds close. So for me, myself, and how can I relate this thing, the gift of laughter? What did this writer today say? My self-pity and anger denied me the simplest of pleasures or lightness of heart. By the end of his drinking, not even alcohol could provoke a drunken giggle in him or her. And then the AA sponsor mentioned the self-pity and ego-feeding deceptions. Let's see, I need to go back to talking about when I went through treatment. I've been to treatment twice. So now I don't know if it's important right now, but at one of the trips through treatment, we took some class because they had something to do all day, every day in treatment. And this class was on, what is it now? Perfectionism. So I didn't have the same definition of perfectionism as they did from their curriculum. I don't know who wrote it or came up with it, but it opened my eyes to some different things about perfectionism. And almost in danger of losing the point here. This ego-feeding deception and taking yourself too seriously. What's the title of today's reading? And then how might that apply to step 2? And then how is my life intertwined with it, being a recovering alcoholic here. Today's title is called The Gift of Laughter. And I'm under the understanding, or I believe, these books, this book in particular, let's try and narrow it down to that. It's the second month, February, so I believe all throughout the second month they're talking about the second step kind of things. So let's read step 2, keeping in mind the gift of laughter. The 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And then in the reading here it says, before my recovery from alcoholism began, laughter was one of the most painful sounds I knew. I never laughed. I felt that anyone else's laughter was directed at me. My self-pity and anger denied me the simplest of pleasures or lightness of heart. By the end of my drinking, not even alcohol could provoke a drunken giggle in me. When my AA sponsor began to laugh and point out my self-pity and ego-feeding deceptions, I was annoyed and hurt, but it taught me to lighten up and focus on my recovery. I soon learned to laugh at myself, and eventually I taught those I sponsored to laugh also. Every day I ask God to help me stop taking myself too seriously. Here's some more about me and my recovery from alcoholism and perfectionism and drug addiction and anger addiction, emotional addictions, I guess. Every day I ask God to help me stop taking myself too seriously. The thing about myself, I've been sober coming up on, or I just went over 19 years, I think. I was going to say coming up on 20 years. Anyhow, these books, I read a whole slew of devotional readings regarding alcohol recovery, but not every day, most days. Anyhow, statements like this one, every day I ask God to help me stop taking myself too seriously. I don't do that. The nice thing I've learned, though, about, see, it isn't just this one thing. Every day I ask God to help me stop taking myself too seriously. I don't always make a direct prayer out of gratitude towards my power greater than myself every day. I don't think, except for when I eat. And so it's pretty regular, though. However, for myself, what I've found over time is early in the day is probably the most effective time, best time for myself to pray. Give thanks for waking up and not dying in my sleep, and give thanks for waking up without a horrific hangover. Just those two things. That's a regular, super good deal every day that I've been sober. And then, like I said about this statement, every day I ask God to help me not take myself too seriously. I don't seem to either recall, remember, or state, or ask, or say a prayer of thanks first thing in the morning every day. Guess what? This perfectionism thing, this taking myself too seriously and the gift of laughter, see, I'm already giggling about it. That because it's one of these things from back in the past. I think part of the many things, probably, just in layman's speak, that kept me drinking was this sense of perfectionism. And my definition of that, or the way I was understanding it, was I was an alcoholic. That's like this mess of stuff here. And nobody was allowed to see that. But it was there. So, the image that I presented to, probably most importantly, were the people I worked with closely or closely related to. The people I had the most contact with. And then, just to not even kid myself at all, being this mess of an alcoholic, I had to have money to buy my drug, which was alcohol. So I had a job. Guess what? That job was critical to getting the money, to get the drug, to get Tony, if that's what I called myself today, feeling better that day, or whatever. So, perfectionism. I couldn't let people know or see this version of me, so that was over here. And then this perfectionism in my head was painting a picture of who I wanted people to see, or which version of Tony I wanted them to see and know. So a lot of this also stems from the military, I was an aircraft mechanic, and anything, even if you're, I can't think, if you're a cook, a mess crank, a chef or something, ultra critical too. Because I was about to say, when I screwed up my job, people died. Well, a guy loading the gun or something too in infantry. I was in the Navy, but every job, if you screw up your job in the military, essentially, people are going to die. And a lot of times it's like a direct result of you not doing your job properly, correctly. So mistakes weren't laughed at. They were learned from. Anyhow, so I had that in my head. And then I get out of the military, and I'm an alcoholic still, because I was an alcoholic in the military also, for sure. I get out into the civilian land and world, whatever, job market. This little ball of alcoholism that I couldn't let people know about, I thought, wrongly thought. Eventually it turned out that I needed help. Anyways, put that over here. Don't let people see that. My perfectionism was, if my image I'm presenting to these people are one of the job is done to exceedingly exact measures, to that level, as perfect as possible, definitely for sure within any given tolerance, I figured, like, that thing, if I do my job well, if I just only do the job well, and the product of that job is done almost to perfection, meaning at least it's on time and it is not flawed, and well, let's just keep it that simple. And I figured, as long as I did those two things, they didn't need to know really anything else about me. And all the horrible thoughts in my head, and the alcoholism and all this stuff. So having those two criteria, that's another one I need to look up. Criterion, and what is it? Phenomena and phenomenon. Put that over here. The alcoholism part over here that's hiding in the dark. Do the job right, everything will be okay. So that drifted into, I just figured as long as the job got done correctly, then I could be late to work. And then my perfectionism was such as this, that all my tools, my toolbox, as much as possible, my uniform and such, were definitely within standards. I didn't want to rock the boat in any way in any other area because of the alcoholism. I needed that hidden. So I needed to maintain this image of that guy's right on all the time. At least on the job, if anything ever got questionable, which it did, because I started thinking and taking, I don't know, liberty and freedoms that your rules, other than getting the job done correctly, are not for me. So absenteeism, a poor attitude, explosive, angry temper about things that weren't right. It's just not very personable and unpredictable, up and down craziness. Here's some of this. I needed to be restored to sanity. So somewhere along the line there, when I went to treatment the second time and had my eyes opened a little further, or looking in a different direction at perfectionism, it's like another part of this, if you're taking yourself too seriously, is believing, see, that's, I've been trying to paint this little picture here, is that as long as I did the job right, all the rest of my flaws either don't need to be examined, or that's nothing, because look at how good I am in this one tiny area of my life, trying to be perfect. I couldn't laugh at my mistakes, all that kind of stuff, taking myself way too seriously in that area. So, I mean, that comes with inherent problems right there, because every time I missed the mark, that was another thing that kept me drinking, essentially. So that's another reason why, well, let's say perfectionism is not a good trait to cultivate or use in your life. It's nice to have a guideline or a standard that you're after, say, so you can always be working towards some goal, like a nameable, measurable goal. And this is where this perfectionism thing, nothing is perfect except maybe Jesus, if you're inclined to believe that kind of thing. But and then if you're, I don't want to get all, you are not I'm going to say, for a human to be like Jesus might be the goal, but it's one that you're probably never, ever going to reach. That kind of comes up against a bunch of my religiosity, whatever that word might be. Anyways, a goal, a measurable goal, shouldn't be completely out of range. It needs to be something that might possibly be done, or like, say, this is it's like there's no way, like here, I'm roughly 6 feet tall. I might still grow in the next couple years. I don't know. But I don't think, it's almost a guarantee I'm not going to grow enough to be 7 feet tall in my physical stature. I think that's a unrealistic goal to shoot for by standing up straight and stretching, whatever. I don't think I'm ever going to make it to 7 feet. 6'1¼ might be something doable. I could maybe get some hair, a wig, I don't know, wear a hat, heels. I could stretch more. I think that would certainly be more attainable. Okay, so that might be a good standard to shoot for. But realistically, I'm 6 feet tall. One part of that goal might be, I don't want to become any shorter. I don't want things getting in the way that are going to prevent me from heading towards that goal. So where was I with this perfectionism thing? and trying to cover up my alcoholism with order. The alcoholism, this ball over here, chaos. Didn't want people to know about the chaos in my life. So the absenteeism and the arriving late to work frequently, and then I mentioned the attitude problems. Let's just leave it at that. Really got to be a problem. And I was trying to get into this part. The perfectionism, one part of that is believing or taking yourself too seriously, because it says today's title, The Gift of Laughter. At this juncture, his AA sponsor usually laughs. I'd like to read that, but that's just out of the book. The 12 by 12 on page 26. I probably won't get to that today. I might. But where I'm trying to go with this perfectionism thing is my belief. Perfect would be flawless, zero defects, zero. Not 0.1 or 0. String is 0.1 or whatever. 0.0 forever, no defects. Perfect. Very difficult, if not outright impossible, to attain that in any area, provided that we're humans. And like I was saying a few days ago, at most, going to live reasonably, goal 100 years. Everything is kind of about a 6-foot kind of world we live in. The scale of things is, in a lot of ways, is human-centric, or at least that's maybe what we can be thinking about mostly. And what was the other thing? This planet is only so big. It's like 25,000 miles in diameter, roughly. You know, mountains and stuff too, though. So, and mountains are only so high and valleys are only so low. I think maybe the lowest point, besides somewhere under the water in an ocean, in a trench or whatever, because I don't know how deep that stuff is. But on land, I think maybe the lowest spots are maybe no lower than probably 500 feet of a natural occurring basin. Sinkholes, different matter. But even if it was an endless sinkhole, it could only go 25,000 miles. Or no, it'd be, 25,000 miles to get to the other side of the earth. Or would it be half that, 12 and a half? Whatever. If it was an endless deep hole, it would just go right through the planet. And the planet's only so big, 25,000 miles in diameter. Mountains are only like, I think I might have wrongly said, 20,000 feet tall. I think Everest might be 22,000. So mountains aren't 30,000 feet tall, so under 30,000 feet, 6 foot tall in stature, 25,000 miles around on this orb that we live on. It's only 300 feet deep at the deepest on land, 25,000 feet tall, 30, whatever I said, less than 30. 100-year lifespan. Perfection. How are you going to be perfect with just those constraints? You're only going to live 100 years, roughly. There's isolated outlying cases. Yes. Anyhow, what am I getting at? My perfectionism didn't allow a singular defect was my goal. So, that being unattainable, like 90% of the time, at least for sure, like probably more like 99 point string of nines, it's impossible. Flawless, zero defects. For me, it was, well, here, just for myself, impossible. So, even in the smallest things, this is what I'm trying to get at, is that learning to laugh at your mistakes, maybe not laugh at your mistakes, but laugh at yourself, because you're human, and likely a flaw or two, or maybe many more, are going to occur every day. Maybe many per hour. And the key thing here is what my psychotherapist told me years ago, was this, I learned a new term, uh, like turning everything into a catastrophe. Like this was the most critical thing. And I used to like to blame my military training on that particular thing. If it isn't perfect, people are going to die, which might be true. So I'm not discounting that entirely. But being human, mistakes will occur. You could be working on something. This happens frequently. And either the material, to no fault of the human, the tool breaks or the object breaks in some unpredictable manner, and say explodes and kills everybody, which happens. That's catastrophic, yes. However, to a lesser degree, things like, okay, so you make a mistake or two because you're human. I'm going to get out on a limb here and say a lot of times that's forgiven because you're human. I was so hung up in, this is such another big bunch of imposter syndrome and survivor's guilt and perfectionism. I had those three things directly related to some of my military service where people did die. And so just put that over here. That was another excuse to drink. So I thought it was okay. And then, mainly in the civilian sector, the physical image of myself was pretty close to being, definitely acceptable. It may be a step over, hopefully in most cases, the other person. And then it's like, well, I can't always be perfectly clean because I was a spray painter and I'd get covered in paint and I looked like crap most of the time. But the work was flawless, almost. And so everything, it was just get the work done right, and then you can start docking me points for about my absenteeism, my bad attitude and things or whatever later. But the work is perfect, so just get off me, was kind of my attitude. So, or nearly perfect. Well, okay. What the therapist had pointed out to me was a new term, catastrophizing things, which this other thing, what's today's thing? The gift of laughter. Every day I ask God to help me stop taking myself too seriously. I read that definition from over here, and what I've been saying about perfection. If I was perfect, then I would be flawless, and even if I was drinking, that would be covered up because I'm perfect, right? That isn't a real thing, no goal in the 6-foot human world that I was living in, and you are probably living in also. So, the tiniest flaw or defect in my work, to me, my ego would not let that, it was not acceptable. However, it did happen occasionally. I don't know how frequent. But catastrophizing, the level of distress I would put on myself, the weight of the guilt and the shame that this time it wasn't perfect. This is what I kind of learned in treatment about perfectionism. I had a different understanding previously. It was nearly, I figured, the way I looked at it, this is going to end my life today because of this one defect. And that awfulizing, catastrophizing, this is such an awful catastrophe, it's going to end my life today for the tiniest of flaws that anybody else would just let go. Let's put it that way. Okay, so that was a big part of the appetite for the alcohol. It's like, well, I missed the mark today, and then at least three things. I would call myself a loser, a quitter, you're an idiot, say, and just a whole bunch of other kind of that whole negative picture of myself, my self-image, because I didn't make it to the mark. I mean, maybe astronauts need to be, right up next door to perfect, if not perfect. I mean, there's some astronauts that are some pretty well put together human beings. Anyways, not being an astronaut, I could strive for that. I could be headed in that direction, which I kind of thought I was doing. But being human and not absolutely dependent upon that seriously, people are going to die today if I don't make it to my mark, was rarely the case after I left the military. I mean, anyhow, so if that would be that's in the 90 percentile. It's got to be at least 85%, at least as a bare minimum. 84% failure, catastrophe. I'm going to die now. Okay, so it always had to be over 85%. Shooting for at least 95% or better in everything, except time clock matters. What time did I show up? Because the job's at 95% and above. The tools, all the different things in the shop are, because this ball of alcoholism over here I thought was still staying hidden. I don't know how apparent it was to other people because I'm not other people, but I see people now after being sober for like 19 years that have been drinking, and it's just readily apparent this human being is impaired to some level and they're not aware of it. Okay. So, where am I going with the gift of laughter and taking yourself too seriously? 32 minutes. This thing will go 49 minutes, I determined, I think, the other day. And then it will instantly just start on the next track, this camera, which I do like that. Because it takes me 15 minutes to just talk, to start feeling comfortable talking, I think. Anyways, catastrophizing things. That was like the impetus, the driving factor behind my active alcoholism. The way I could cope with not making my mark up in the 90 percentile range was drowning my alleged perceived sorrows in alcohol, which did work for a limited time to a limited degree at some cost that I thought was manageable. For a little while, a long, long, long time ago, at the earliest days of drinking, alcohol was actually working in the way that might be a responsible way to use a drug, or at that point, like a medication. However, I'm an alcoholic, it turns out. And for me, that means I've got an allergy to the alcohol. I may not have always had it, but I certainly have it these days, and the before times and the way back days. A little bit of the alcohol might have medically worked and done its thing early on, like I was just saying. Let's say that lasted a year. Let's say that lasted the first 3 years. There's no way it did, but let's say it was still working like a medicine and being used responsibly the first 3 years of my drinking, which would have been like 16, 17, and 18 years old. And not even close. Every single time, it was just out of control, way too much. 5 drinks isn't enough. 500 drinks, not too many. Well, 500, that's kind of pushing it. 50, not too many, because I would try and get there. And on a regular basis, I could, after time, it's like 20 drinks weren't too many. I could still physically drink. I was going to do it. That's the kind of alcoholism I was in. So the perfectionism and striving for excellence and all these kind of things, when I missed even coming up to 90%, I'm having a shot as soon as I get home, right? I'm going to have an 80 proof drink, 1 ounce at least. That'll fix it. Well, it might have the first one, and if I could have ever stopped at that, I never could. It would be one followed by another and another, and then who knows how many, until it was gone or I was passed out or physically like arrested and stopped from drinking. It was kind of the last call, for this guy when drinking happened. So that just ended up, I'll just have to drink at home and all this kind of, just a lot of problems. I'm trying to push it over here for now because I'm trying to get at the impetus, the motivation for drinking, I thought was stemming from being an imperfect human being, like there was fundamentally something wrong with me. And my ego loved that, because then my ego could blame me for being sloppy, lazy, all kinds of things. And that's the only thing I was ever listening to anymore. This is taking yourself too seriously, trying to project this image that isn't necessarily even close to what is actually happening. It's maybe the way you'd like to be perceived in the real world, so you can get like that raise and things and stuff, and all related to drinking in some way or another. For me, if I can get that raise, or if I get a paycheck, I'm buying booze, and then my ego will be satisfied and happy, and I'll be all right, or whatever, and all that flawed thinking. Where am I going? Catastrophizing. So even something minor that could easily be passed, and it was staying within given, like written, printed tolerance levels, specifications. It's like, well, nobody's going to die because it's within spec. It might not even be a rough day for them if it's pushing the envelope of being right within being in tolerance. It's like, so it's a little bit sloppy or loose. It doesn't matter that much. And besides, look at the junk you're working with. It's not your fault. You did the best that you can with what you had. Now, this is kind of the thing with the ego and all that, is I would start blaming myself for maybe a flawed tool. Let's try and rope this in and make it that way. And then, like I've hopefully been depicting here, I could not accept that. Even if the tool isn't good, I should still be able to do a perfect job. 85%, not a problem. If I can't make 90%, even with this flawed tool, that's not going to be good enough. I'm going home in a bad mood. I'm going to call myself a loser, and I'm going to drink to fix it, or whatever. And then not being able to quit, I'd drink all night, and then I'd be late to work the next day if I even showed up, and then the work would suffer, and then I'm a loser, and I'm an alcoholic, and all this crap. This started to become look, Tony's late again. He must, some of my fellow employees started calling it, like today's Friday. Friday, if I bothered showing up, it's like I would be late, and Thirsty Thursday happened. I laughed because, like I was saying, I don't know how much other people knew about my drinking. Oh, they knew every bit of it, I'm sure. Within 3 days of being the new guy at a new job somewhere, they probably had the whole picture. even if they were unforgiving and had some prejudice against me in other areas for whatever reason, or not even looking for anything. It's just like, wow, look at this tiny little flaw that Tony caused or did or whatever, got, and then this pattern over and over. Bingo, alcoholic. It's not that hard to diagnose in other people or suspect. Shouldn't be judging other people. It took me forever. That's this thing again. Like, I don't like these things every day. I pray or ask to do this, and every day I strive for, because like every day and forever and never, those words are dangerous to me, for me to use, to live in this unforgiving area. Because another thing, the therapist, was the road. There's like a center line in the road, and there's a couple of lanes to travel in, and then there's a little bit of a border area, and then there's like a ditch way over here and a ditch way over here on this side. And this pattern of mine, and like you could use this example too, with the emotional thing and the rigidity, the weight, the price, the penalty for things was usually out of proportion to the actual real world 6 foot tall, 25,000 mile diameter kind of thing that we're typically doing as a human. It's like, that's forgivable. We can tolerate that. It's all right. It's not in the middle of the road where we'd like to be, but that's like perfectionism, this thing that may not ever be attained by a simple regular human. Maybe you should start looking at yourself as a human, and maybe just being a simple garden variety human, because really, even the most spectacular things you've done, somebody else has probably done it already by now, and somebody else is going to do exactly that much and a whole bunch more as soon as possible, because they'll see that mark, and it's, it's like this thing with the 4-minute mile thing. Well, that's maybe not a good example. Anyways, what I'm getting at. What am I getting at? Perfectionism. 42 minutes. That's not actually Gatorade. Wow. And it isn't urine, though, so that's good news. No catastrophe here. Oh, the weight, the pressure I put on myself to be perfect or in the 90% tile range or better, and then if I ever missed it, go home and cry myself to sleep after drinking myself into a stupor over and over every day, late to work, all the whole, that cycle of ugliness in the drinking days. Never laughing at myself, for which nowadays, over this past 19 years, with the opportunities to every day pray to not take myself too seriously, which I miss frequently. Let's say it's twice a month that I say something like that, or pray, or honestly have this thought, maybe I don't need to be that serious. With the, let's just call it 20 years, well, 19 years, whatever. In the past couple of decades, having this opportunity to work a bunch of these steps and paying attention to what's going on, say, for example, in this little book, The Gift of Laughter. The gift, it's a gift. It's free. It's like, just because it's free, though, doesn't mean it's easy. I'm going to say that. Because you've already been hearing about my struggles with things need to be perfect. If it isn't perfect, it's a catastrophe. That's just all or nothing thinking kind of thing also, from the psychobabble psychologist kind of person in my life at that time, which I don't mean anything negative by that, just people like to hear that sometimes. Psychobabble BS. Well, it isn't. It really makes a lot of good sense. Okay, it's the center of the road thing, and the ditch over here, and the ditch over there, and trying to stay perfectly in the middle of the road. That's the all or nothing thinking, catastrophe or perfection. Those were my choices in life. Neither one of them. The perfection, I don't think perfect is like, I might have this wrong. It's zero defects. Zero. Not like 6 sigma down to the like 30 decimal points and then a 1. Or 5 sigma where I think that's like, it's like 6 or not 6. It's like a million. Maybe it is 6. 0.000001 is like, I think that's 5 sigma or 6 sigma. It's, man, the real world, aeronautical stuff and astronauts and things like that, that's kind of like, the standard 6 sigma. Because if this thing fails, a lot of bad stuff is going to happen. A lot of things aren't like that, though, in this 6-foot-tall human-scaled world stuff, right? Okay. So me painting parts, say, for example, it's like, man, the world is going to keep spinning. Everything's going to fine. Even if I just put this tool right through the product and try and push it out to the customer with a physical hole right through it, they might get it and whatever. It's just, it isn't going to stop the world. It's not catastrophe or perfectionism. There's a gray area. That's what I was looking for. So, a lot of things in life, there's some borders, there's some guardrails, say, in a lot of areas that is pretty generous too. It's like, as long as you don't need to be right in the middle of the road, you can be swerving all over that center line and even going off into that boundary forgiveness area a little bit before the ditch, before a lot of people even bat an eye. So it is catastrophe versus perfectionism, not helpful. It might be something to strive for, and striving means that you never actually reach it. I think that's one definition. Maybe that's how I look at it. So it's not really good to be striving for, in salesman speak, I don't know what the proper way, but if you indicate to the customer you're always striving for something, that means you've never reached it and you're still trying to get there. It's like, I'm going to pick the guy that calls himself perfect or whatever because he thinks he's there. I got about a minute and a half before this shuts me down. I don't know what to do. Be expecting part 2 maybe. And this will really just stop, and then we'll have to work on the details later. But it's going to be all right. These are some of the things I've learned. We can laugh at that. I'm sorry. Now I don't feel like I'm going to hit the right kind of answer I wanted to provide. You know what? Too bad. Good enough. You can come back tomorrow, and if I do one of these, maybe we'll have the answer then. Thank you for spending your time here. Maybe you've actually invested your time here. That would be better. That's a goal. So, thank you. Goodbye.